All right, well, it is 6:47, so I will call the meeting to order now, 8:47 Eastern, 6:47 Mountain. Does the screen say it's record? Yes, it is recording. Let me share my screen. One moment. And of course, Zoom like moves my windows all over the place. Of course it does. Okay, one second. I do want to try to get the chat up if I can. But if you could take attendance, Madam Secretary.
All right. Arrowwood, present. Bracco. Szalski.
Here.
All right. Harlos,
Present.
Latham,
Here.
Martin,
Present.
Molman,
Here.
Rowlett,
Here.
Rufo, Seebeck.
Here.
Okay. Bracco, Paul Bracco. Mike Rufo. Madam Chair, we have 8 present. Bracco and Rufo of the regulars are absent. I'll call the alternates. Dr. Chuck Moulton,
Here.
Rich Tomaso, Dave Robertson, Greg Deal, Roger Roots, Data Logan, Dean Rogers.
Here.
All right. Tomaso, Robertson, Deal, Roots, Logan.
I just heard go ahead, Madam Secretary.
Dr. Chuck Moulton will replace Rufo. That's A1. And Bracco will be replaced by Dean Rogers, number A7.
Mr. Bracco just joined the room.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, we have Dr. Chuck Moulton then standing in for Mike Rufo.
All right, thank you. And looks like we have a couple members of the public. Oh, Mike Rufo is coming in the room.
Oh, okay.
So it is time for public comment. I do see that Mr. Madden has his hand raised. I will call upon him in one moment. Just an FYI, anyone who's not in the committee, please feel free to offer any comments at this time. And committee members, if you have something, you just wish to say that really doesn't fit neatly into an agenda item, now is the time. Mr. Madden.
Yes, Madam Chair and committee and alternates. Just want to say a quick thank you to everyone for their hard work doing this. And I also want to give a special thanks to committee members who have put forward the change in LNC structure. I forget which letter it is in the proposals, but I just want to say thank you. During the town hall, it was said that the committee needs to do things that are, I guess, popular, or not necessarily popular, but have a lot of support from the membership, which I think the anti-libertarian sentiment is on the rise. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madden. Madam Secretary, Mr. Logan just entered the room. And just for the record, I do want to clarify what I said during the town hall was And I mean this word radical, not in any kind of ideological way. I think everyone knows what I mean by that. I had said that radical changes should be something that there's a groundswell of support from the grassroots that had been building for years. That was the exact comment, and I do stand by that. Now, I know not everyone agrees. My philosophy of committee work is that committees are to have light conservative touches. And I don't mean conservative, again, here I am with all these disclaimers in the political sense. Is there anyone else who wishes to offer public comment? All right, seeing none, there were draft minutes distributed and a couple revisions. Ms. Arrowood did post the latest revision. This is for our January, February, March, April, May. I'm always bad with May with 5 for some reason. For our May 18th meeting, is there any objection to approving those draft minutes, again, which were distributed on the list earlier this week, to approving those? Seeing none, Ms. Arrowood, those are approved. Now we're on to agenda item 2. And the chair will be asking the committee for how they wish to handle this. There is a way that the chair believes is the best way, but that might not be what the committee thinks. Where we had ended up was discussing allowing electronic balloting, which was a proposal P, which has been revised by Mr. Latham. The revised version is what is linked on the agenda. And at the time, we had left the meeting pretty confident that some minor revisions were all that were needed to get it passed. Myself, at least, and I believe some others tended to agree. I know Mr. Brown tended to agree, who's been an observer, Mr. Brown being the party parliamentarian, that digging into this and starting to explain how things are done in real life on the convention floor and looking at the rules at least made me, putting on my LNC secretary hat, realize that our rules when it comes to voting are a hot mess. And if all of the former secretaries were to drop off the planet and there were no videos of conventions, they would have no idea by reading our rules how we've actually done things at convention. And like I learned by watching Alicia Matson. In theory, a secretary should be able to read the rules and get at least a general idea. So this is what the chair suggests. I had done a major rewrite of our voting rules. In order to prepare them like a nice little made bed to then add in Mr. Latham's or some version of Mr. Latham's electronic balloting. I would suggest that we look at the rewrite first and then add in electronic balloting. However, the committee does not have to handle it that way. We can perfect the language on the electronic balloting first and then move on to the rewrite. I think we're going to end up going back to electronic balloting if we do it that way. I think we have to have the rules as things actually are before we can meaningfully amend for electronic balloting. So this is what the chair is going to do. And if someone from the committee objects, we're going to take a vote on it. I'm going to bring up the major rewrite first, then move on to electronic balloting. I see Mr. Bracco has his hands raised, has his little yellow hand raised. Mr. Bracco.
So just information, you're saying that we amend the agenda to insert the major rewrite link ahead of proposal P?
The two are connected, so they're on the agenda together. However, I've been giving priority of time. It's like first in, first heard, and Mr. Latham's electronic balloting was in first. So if we're going to follow that rule, we will deal with that first. However, logically, I think it's better to look at the rewrite, which is conjoined to the electronic balloting. Mr. Bracco?
So are these two the same agenda item, or are they separate agenda items at this time?
At this time, they are on the agenda as item number 2 as related items.
And is this some, I'm just trying to understand what you're trying to do. So like, I understand what you're trying to do from like a practical standpoint, but from a procedural standpoint, are you trying to separate them and make it its own agenda item that is ahead of, like, basically 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes 4, et cetera, and then insert this major rewrite as 2? Is that what's happening?
No, though that could be one way to describe it. What my rewrite does is kind of changes everything around the electronic voting, then gets to the electronic voting. In a way, it can be considered a substitute, though I don't think we need to get into it that way. I think we can consider it separately. So I would suppose, Mr. Bracco, that the way you worded it is one way to handle it. On the committees, the chair tends to set the agenda, though I've had the informal rules. So what I am saying is I am intending upon going to the rewrite first. If a majority of the committee, so I'm not treating it as an amending of the agenda. If a majority of the committee would rather just deal with the narrow electronic balloting language first, then that's what we're going to do. So does the committee want to vote, or does the committee agree with my suggestion? Mr. Latham?
Well, in principle, I support your suggestion. I guess I have the same question as Mr. Bracco, just procedurally how we ought to do that. I do like your rewrite in that it kind of clears away a lot of underbrush, and then I think it's going to make consideration of the allowing electronic balloting item a lot easier. So I'm wondering if we ought to just, this is almost maybe a question of parliamentary procedure, whether we just make your rewrite like 2A and then make the allow electronic balloting 2B.
That is effectively what I'm suggesting.
Okay. And just, yeah, I like that approach. In fact, I was going to suggest, had you not suggested doing that, that we even table the electronic balloting, just because it is such a major rewrite in a way. I think it would be helpful to digest and then see how electronic balloting can fit in once we do all those big pieces.
Procedurally, what you just said is much closer to what I'm saying, is to table it until we do the rewrite, then go back to it, which is why I'm saying a majority and not 2/3. Mr. Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I would like to see the committee work on these two things as a separate proposal, separate proposals, partly because I think that presenting these to the convention will be a lot easier if they're not bundled together. The smaller bite-sized pieces for the delegates will be a little easier for them to digest and work with. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. And we can make those kinds of decisions with the report. I tend to agree with you that if presuming we pass both a rewrite and adding electronic balloting, what I would suggest when we do our report is that they are like a part A and part B of a proposal that aren't dependent upon each other, that the rewrite can fail and we can still do electronic balloting, but they are interconnected. So I do agree with you, because it may be that the convention wants to do a rewrite and still has their weird aversion to electronic balloting, or they might think a rewrite's not necessary and they want to add electronic balloting. So I don't want to make the two dependent upon each other, but they are related. Mr. Latham.
And I just wanted to throw out the scenario. I mean, wouldn't we have perhaps an electronic balloting provision that is worded in a way in the event the rewrite does not pass?
Yes.
Right.
It just
So
would
we-
not be ideal, I think, but
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
All right. So I'm asking now if even one committee member thinks they'd like to vote to take up mine first, you know, or if you just agree, we're going to move on to taking up the rewrite first. But if one person even objects, we're going to take a vote on this and we're treating it as a motion to table. All right, seeing none, I'm pulling up the rewrite. This gets complex. When I mentioned to Richard Brown earlier today, he was like, yes, your rules are a mess, and holy cow, is that going to be tough to fix? So I'm going to read the problem, and then we'll get to the solution. The problem is our balloting rules are all over the place. There's no consistent procedure in writing. It's more our custom or oral tradition on how the secretary, vote tellers, and delegation chairs are actually supposed to do this thing. So with major rewrites, I like to show my thought process or show my work, as it were. So we're going to go through my thought process before we get to something we're actually going to be debating. First, I want to show you the first thing I did was went through our rules and highlighted which you should be seeing on the screen, every single place where election voting / balloting rules appeared. So it was all of Rule 3, portions of Rule 7, portions of Rule 8, all of Rule 9, and all of Rule 10. And those are just all over the place. And there's duplicativeness and confusion. So then what I did is I struck through everywhere they were scattered and moved them all to Rule 3 without changing anything, just to make sure nothing got lost in translation. And I also deleted the title of Rule 3 of polling procedure. This is not something we have ever done since I've been in the party. And I actually think it's against our bylaws if we ever tried to do it, because it violates the secret ballot. And we do not have provisions in our bylaws to violate the secret ballot. I don't believe a rule can violate the secret ballot. It would require a bylaw. So change the title of Rule 3 to election balloting procedure. And I struck out that portion that I believe was out of order to begin with, which is in cases where a roll call vote is required. There are no cases in which a roll call vote is required at a convention. Polling shall be by state. The secretary will ask for the vote from each state in alphabetical order, and the chair of each delegation shall report the vote for the state. That's not a problem. We can always do that, though. We don't need a rule for that. This is where things get weird. If someone challenges the vote reported by any state's chairs, the secretary shall poll the delegates from that state individually. That sentence is illegal. We're not allowed to do that absent a bylaw. If we want to be able to do that, we need to stick that in the bylaws and not in the rules. And I do see your hand, Dr. Moulton. I'm going to call on you now because you might have a question before I move on and it might become irrelevant or confusing.
No, I just had a historical note. I believe that the Ohio delegation was polled in Columbus, if I recall correctly, and maybe Ken can correct me on that, but I do recall that happening.
Before my time, I do believe that's illegal, though. You know what I mean by illegal. I don't mean like against the law of the land. I mean against the law of General Robert. Mr. Molman.
Yes. So I believe it actually happened at Red Rock in 2012 during the vote on chair, if I remember right. And I think, and I remember the debate over all of this, and it had something to do with, it was something about delegates aren't the same as normal voters. I mean, I remember this debate over secret ballots versus not. We had it on conventions before, but yeah, I don't know. I'm personally a secret ballot guy. I'm just throwing out there what the argument was
Yeah.
the other way, was that
They're
because we're delegates, we're
incorrect,
representing
however.
people and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I'm just letting you know that was the argument that was made that I recall at the time, so.
Yeah, and absent a bylaw, no one can be forced to reveal the contents of a ballot. A ballot is presumed to be secret. Bylaws can change that. Colorado's bylaws do not have secret ballots. I'm the opposite of you. I'm not a secret ballot person, but I'm also even more so not an illegal rule person. So I did strike that out. And then all of this purple is everywhere where I'd previously highlighted it dealt with election balloting. I just moved it all without changing it up to Rule 3. And I showed where I struck it out of all of these others. And because I did that in Rule 8, I also struck out where it says election of officers, since all the election is going to go into the election procedure rule, changed it to nomination. And because we had a rule that said that the judicial committees to handle the exact same way as at large, it seemed dumb to have another rule when we could just do it all in one rule. And then that would then make Rule 9 and Rule 10 gone, because there's no reason for it. It all got combined. And I'm going to suggest later that we do the same thing with nominations, but I'm not doing that all in one rule thing, because nominations will be in multiple rules right now. Then I took the new Rule 3 with everything moved around and arranged it in a logical order without making text changes. I don't know why number 1 is struck out. It's not supposed to be. Just arranged it in a logical order. Don't know why 15 is purple. That's just the way it is. So now that we have everything in one place, I did a markup of combining it to show you guys what I did. I want to get to where we're actually going to be voting on things. So, which will be on the section before. But I would like to read aloud what the clean new Rule 3 would be if we, in fact, did this. And then I have something for electronic balloting, but we're going to start when we do electronic balloting with Mr. Latham's proposal. So Rule 3, election balloting procedure. 1, the state chair shall serve as chair of his or her delegation unless that delegation selects another of its members to serve as its chair and so notifies the secretary. The convention seating will be by state delegation. There shall be a team of vote tellers approved by the secretary. 2, each delegation shall conduct its vote by written ballot delivered to the delegation chair, who shall tabulate the votes on a delegation tally sheet provided for this purpose. The delegation chair then submits their tally sheet with a sealed envelope containing each of the delegate ballots to the vote tellers. When all delegations have submitted their votes, the convention chair shall declare the voting closed. After each delegation has tabulated its own vote totals, before submitting the totals to the secretary, the vote tellers shall review the ballot tabulation for accuracy and co-sign the delegation totals. After the secretary or the vote tellers have recorded all delegation submissions, the state-by-state delegation totals for each candidate or choice shall be displayed on a projection screen for each delegation to review for accuracy during the period of time allotted for such votes. The business of the convention shall continue without interruption. 3, for each election for office or nomination, a majority vote shall be required. 4, in single winner races, each delegate may cast a ballot with 1 vote for a candidate or for none of the above. If no candidate has attained a majority, the candidate with the fewest votes and any candidate polling less than 5% shall be struck from subsequent ballots. This procedure shall be repeated after every ballot in which no candidate has received a majority vote until one candidate attains a majority. Number 5, in multi-winner races, there's some capitalization issues, I realize, and an extra period. Let me just take care of that. Each delegate may cast a ballot for a vote for either none of the above or one vote per candidate for any number of candidates. Every ballot with a vote for none of the above or one or more candidates is counted as one ballot cast. A vote for none of the above shall be ignored if the ballot also includes a vote for any other candidate. Tied votes affecting the outcome shall be decided by lot. If the total number of candidates to fill the open seats have not attained a majority, any candidates who have attained a majority shall be elected, and the candidate with the fewest votes and any candidates polling less than 5% shall be struck from subsequent ballots. This procedure shall be repeated until, I don't know why I have an extra word there, repeated. It should be until the total number of candidates to fill the open seats have received a majority vote or been elected in previous rounds. 6, in the event a region has not otherwise provided for the election of its national committee representation, then the delegates from the region shall elect its regional representative and alternate, provided there are at least 5 delegates present. Each region's delegates may elect their representative and alternate in whatever manner they choose, provided all delegates present from that region are given equal voice in the selection. Number 7, and I'm leaving this language here. I know we're going to plan on striking this when we get to electronic ballots, but this proposal doesn't deal with electronic balloting at all. So it keeps the exact same language that was already there. In cases where computer readable ballots are used, each delegate must sign the ballot and submit it to the delegation chair. I have a feeling there's a problem with signing there, by the way, but I'm not changing this language because I know we're going to work on changing it later. After verifying the number of votes cast does not exceed the number the state is entitled to, the chair of each delegation shall submit the ballots to the secretary. And actually, that sentence was supposed to be struck because it was moved up. So here's where we're at with voting, because things get a little sloppy. So the first thing, I'm trying to think of the best way to handle this. The first thing to do, I believe, is to vote on this right here. Forget about the purple. And that is striking the title polling procedure and inserting election balloting procedure. And in part 2, striking everything except for the convention seating will be by state delegation. We will be moving that up to number 1 in a separate vote. But because we're actually striking things here, I think we need to vote on this separately in case there's any controversy about this whole polling thing and renaming it, because if there is, we can keep the title as election balloting and polling procedure if someone liked. So I think this is the first discrete bite we can take. Dr. Moulton.
Yeah, I have some questions about this deletion here. Does this deletion also remove that from the case of a vote for president of the United States? Or is that somewhere else?
That, you're talking about the custom of each chair going up for the first round at least,
Yes.
and saying, in, Florida, where there's alligators,
Right.
we vote for. I believe
Exactly.
that is someplace else. I'm pulling up our bylaws.
I don't believe I'm voted now because I'm not replacing anyone, but if I were voting, then this would decide my vote on this, because I think it's important for president, but in every other context, it is just a waste of time.
Let me look. I did look at this when I wrote this, and then I forgot. because I know that is a custom that we do, and there's nothing stopping us from doing that custom, even absent a rule. Let's see here.
Is it rule 3.2?
No, that's the rule we're looking at now, and that doesn't just talk about president. That's talking about when polling. We're going to get back to that. There is no rule that requires us to do that now, Dr. Moulton. If we go back to Rule 3, it says in cases where a roll call vote is required, polling shall be by state. This rule does not enshrine our custom of doing that presidential thing, because there is nothing requiring polling by state. This is just a custom that we have done. It's not currently in our rules. Deleting that sentence has no change. So 7.3, let's see. I thought it was in here, 7.3. Ah, thank you. It's in that second sentence. Following the first presidential ballot, an announcement of each delegation's vote total shall be made by delegation chairs in alphabetical order. That makes no sense, beginning with a randomly selected delegation. How is it in alphabetical order if you're
No, well,
starting?
it starts from that. It's just so that we
Okay.
don't always start with Alabama or whatever every
Okay,
time.
well, I am, okay, now I recall when I write this, I'm not moving to strike that from Rule 7.
Thank you. I didn't want to belabor the point. I just wanted to clarify that. I
Yes.
appreciate it.
What we will leave that in Rule 7. So I think that thing about the randomly thing is kind of weird. So this is just striking this where a roll call vote is required. There is nothing that happens at convention where a roll call vote is required. And notice, if we thought this dealt with the presidential thing, it would conflict with 7.3, because it says the secretary will ask for the vote from each state in alphabetical order, not starting with a random state and going from alphabetical order from there. So the motion there's Ms. Arrowood.
Yes, I had a question on Rule 3, the first paragraph. The words "of his or her delegation" could be eliminated and not change the text or the meaning at all. I think it's just extra wording that doesn't need to be in there.
Well, we're not at that point. I tend to agree with you. However, the they, and all of that is a huge fight in this party.
Oh,
And I would prefer not to spend floor time on that, to be honest with you. But when we get to that section, when we're amending that section, if someone wants to change that to either reword the sentence or change it to as chair of their delegation, which is how I would write it.
right.
But the policy manual has been rewritten to use they and their, and it was a slog fest. I just can't even, people will be screaming about woke, and I would really love to avoid that. But right now we're dealing with deleting the title polling procedure, changing it to election balloting procedure. Then in Rule 2, striking everything out of 3.2, excuse me, striking everything except for the convention seating will be by state delegation, which in a subsequent motion will be moved up to Rule 1. So it won't be that weird stray sentence. I just want to make it clear I'm not striking that sentence. So that's the motion before us right now. Ms. Arrowood, did you intend to still have your hand up?
No,
Okay. So is there any objection to this change? Mr. Molman?
I just want to clarify, nothing substantive is actually changing here. It's just rearranging, moving things around, or
Oh,
what
no,
is the summary of any substantive change?
the substantive change is striking the title, polling procedure. Ignore everything purple here. All we're looking at is the red and the blue. So the substantive change is to strike the name polling procedure and change it to election balloting procedure. And in Rule 3.2, striking, in cases where a roll call vote is required, polling shall be by state. The secretary will ask for the vote from each state in alphabetical order, and the chair of each delegation shall report the vote for that state. And then I'm leaving alone, the convention seating will be by state delegation, striking if someone challenges the vote reported by any state's chair, the secretary shall poll the delegates from that state individually.
Okay, so that's a substantive. I was more looking at what is actually changing from what we do today, other than our rules being a disaster. So that is a change.
All of this that's in red that I'm striking, we don't do today, except for that example you gave from Ohio in 2012, which is illegal pursuant to Roberts.
Right. I'm just trying to figure out what we're actually changing in the rules, and I apologize. I'm actually mobile and driving in the car, which is why I can't see what's in red, because I'm doing 80 on I-74 and I can't do that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Now, the next thing I'm suggesting, I want to make clear, is an interim motion. Remember that this committee always can turn around and reconsider and ditch everything. But the way to do this is step by step. So the next motion I'm making is going to be very sloppy with the intention that we're going to clean it up. So the next motion I am making is to take all of this stricken purple language out of Rule 7, Rule 8. It should also be purple here with all the language of Rule 9, all the language of Rule 10, and moving it unchanged into Rule 3. We're going to work on changing it because it's going to be a lot of redundancy and all of that, but we need to strike all of this from the other rules. The language that is being struck from other rules and being moved up into Rule 3 is as follows. Out of Rule 7, we would be striking and moving. The party's nominee for president shall be chosen by majority vote. If no candidate has attained a majority, the candidate with the fewest votes and any candidates polling less than 5% shall be struck from subsequent ballots. This procedure shall be repeated after every ballot in which no candidate has received a majority vote until one candidate attains a majority. We would also be striking the next paragraph. And I know the numbering in Google just it's actually number 2. It's not number 7 because it doesn't number properly in Google. Then also the next paragraph. Each delegation shall tabulate its total vote, and that the delegation chair shall deliver a written total to the secretary. When all the delegations have submitted their votes, the secretary shall declare the voting closed following the first presidential ballot. Actually, I do not want to strike that because of what Dr. Moulton said, and I didn't intend to. So that will stay in, and we'll make sure that stays in. 1 second, let me just make that black and unbold it. And then out of Rule 8, we would be striking from Rule 8.1. The election shall be conducted in the following manner. A, for each office, a majority vote will be necessary for election. B, each election shall tabulate its total vote, and the delegation chair shall deliver a written total to the secretary. When all delegations have submitted their votes, the secretary shall declare the voting closed. C, in cases where no candidate receives a majority, runoff votes will be held, dropping the candidate with the fewest votes after each ballot. We would be striking from Rule 8.2, where it's talking about at large. The election shall be conducted in the following manner. And you start to see all the redundant language here. Each delegate may cast a ballot with a vote for either none of the above or one vote per candidate for any number of candidates. Every ballot with a vote for none of the above or one or more candidates is counted as one ballot cast. A vote for none of the above shall be ignored if the ballot also includes a vote for any other candidate. Each delegation shall tabulate its total vote, and the delegation chair shall deliver a written total to the secretary along with the ballots cast. When all delegations have submitted their votes, the chair shall declare the voting closed, which is interesting because in all the other rules, the secretary declared the voting closed when it should be the chair, by the way, each time. The top 5 candidates receiving a majority vote of the ballots shall be elected. Tie votes affecting the outcome shall be decided by lot. And then also the last part of that rule, which talks about election of regional reps. In the event a region has not provided otherwise, so on and so forth. And we would also be moving up to Rule 3, election of the Judicial Committee, which currently says nominations and elections for members of the Judicial Committee shall be conducted in the same manner as specified for at-large members of the National Committee. And also Rule 10, for each vote in which the subtotals are submitted by delegation, each delegation shall conduct its own vote by written ballot after each delegation has tabulated its own vote totals before submitting the totals to the secretary. Tellers approved by the secretary shall review the ballot tabulation for accuracy and co-sign the delegation totals after the secretary has recorded all delegation submissions. The state-by-state delegation totals for each candidate or choice shall be displayed on a projection screen for each delegation to review for accuracy. So to make it clear what my motion is, it is to strike, and you'll have a copy of this, Sylvia. I know this is a nightmare for you, is to strike all of that language from those scattered rules and move them all unchanged up to Rule 2. From there, we will start to amend and perfect them. But right now, no content is being changed from those sections. So they're just being moved up to Rule 2, which has that new, actually, I don't think we took a vote on the first one, did we?
No.
What an idiot. I am an idiot, not you guys. Well, now you've heard the second part of the motion. I'm going to finish talking about that, and then we're going to take a vote or see if there's objection to the first one. So it's basically taking all of that language that's about balloting and shoving it all into Rule 3, where we will work on perfecting it. But because I jumped ahead of myself, first, is there any objection to the first motion, which was to strike polling procedure, change the name to election balloting procedure, and delete that language in red about polling? Is there any objection to that motion? Okay, hearing none. Now, see, I was just able to read your minds. Now we are to the spot where I wanted to en masse move all of the language about balloting.
I hope you can't read our minds. Much scary in here.
Yes, it's scary in here too. So the motion now is to, without changing any of the language, striking all of that language where I showed it appeared in Rules 7, 8, 9, and 10, and just moving it all with no change in substance to Rule 3 so that we can perfect it. Is there any, this is an interim one. We will never propose this on the floor the way it is now. Mr. Bracco.
Understanding what you just said, even given that, is number 6 okay? Like, should there be indents for the next couple?
Maybe.
that,
But we shouldn't worry about that here because we're realizing that this is just to get everything in one place so we can work with it. Worrying about formatting and stuff on something that we know we're intending upon changing and rearranging is just a waste of the committee's time.
so, well,
Yes,
if this vote were to pass and subsequent votes were to all fail, would this become a proposal or would this
no,
just
because we
die?
would still have to do a final vote on adopting a proposal,
Okay,
which we haven't done yet. We're getting to a proposal, but we
Okay,
haven't
so-
assembled it yet.
so no, if this passes and all subsequent votes die, there is no proposal at all. That, I think that answers
Okay.
my question.
I'm going to split hairs here. This is a proposal before the committee, but it's not yet in a form, according to the mover, which is myself, that I am not moving it as a proposal to be moved to vote of the convention floor. This is an interim step that if it were to fail, I would be doing, if subsequent things didn't clean it up, as the mover, I would be moving to just nix the whole thing. We're not going to present, and we're not bound to present, a jumbled hot mess to the delegates. So, is there any objection to this mass move with the understanding that this is not what's going to be presented to the delegates, that this is simply to get everything in one place so we can work with it? Okay, hearing no objection. So it's struck from those other places. That, however, necessitates a change to Rule 8. Which is the next motion I'm going to make, but Mr. Molman had his hand raised.
Madam Chair, so far we haven't made any not real substantial changes, but it sounds like we're about to. I am in my vehicle. I am unable to read these proposals. I would like to cede my seat and allow Dr. Moulton, who I believe is not mobile and seems to be following the conversation a lot more closely, to be seated in my seat, just because I feel like he's going to do a better job at this right now than I will.
No problem, Mr.
That's
Molman.
okay.
So if you could just note that, Madam Secretary.
Yes.
So this will necessitate then a change to Rule 8. Because we moved all of the election language out of Rule 8. And we've completely gotten rid of election of judicial committee. Because we are going to be doing a change to Rule 2, where it will just consider the judicial committee like a multi-winner race, and we're going to have a rule for that. But and that makes Rule 8 really only about nominations, because we just moved all of the election language. So my next motion is to strike in the title of Rule 8 the word election and substitute in nomination, strike the word and before national committee, and add the word and judicial committee. And I see something that I forgot to add here. Nominations for the at-large members of the National Committee, and it was supposed to be also and judicial committee shall be from the floor. Want to add a blue there. And that just puts it all into one section. So that is the motion that's being made right now to change the title of Rule 8 to nomination of officers National Committee, and Judicial Committee. And in 8.2, adding, so it currently says nominations for the at-large members of the National Committee. It will also add and Judicial Committee shall be from the floor. Mr. Latham,
There's an extra M in committee.
where?
At
Oh,
the-
yeah, I see it. Never mind. Yep. Got it. And if you remember, Rule 9 used to just say it was done exactly the same way as at large. So I'm just adding and Judicial Committee in the rule that already existed for at large, because it was dumb to have a separate rule that just said, look at the prior rule to begin with. Anyway, so that is the next motion to clean up Rule 8 to make sense now that we moved all of the election language out. Is there any objection to this motion? Mr. Bracco?
So you now have two subsections of Rule 8. One that says nominations for the officers shall be from the floor.
Right.
One that says nominations for both the at-large
Yes.
and Judicial Committee from the floor. Is there any benefit to having those? Like, why not have one that says all three? Is there a benefit to having officers separate?
No.
Still?
If you might not remember at the beginning of my soliloquy, I said, I think everything to do with nominations needs to be combined into one thing, like we're doing with elections right now. But I didn't
Okay.
want to do too much in this proposal. I
Okay.
will have a future proposal that will deal with nominating procedures, and it will have everything in it, including president, vice president, officers, National Committee, and Judicial Committee in one rule, just like we're doing for elections, to simplify our rules. But that was too much to ask in this one proposal. I'd like to keep the subject matters separate. So is there any objection to this motion? Okay, hearing none. Now, where we are at, this is all of the language we just moved. This is driving me crazy. I'm not able to fix it. That's all under Rule 3 now, with no language changed. So we are going to amend from here. I can tell you the way we're going to handle this on the floor, by the way, though, is via a substitution. We might even combine a nomination thing like Mr. Bracco brought up. We're not going to go through all these steps on the floor. I'm going through all these steps so that the committee can see what we're doing and we come up with the best proposal, but we're going to end up doing it as a motion to strike like all of a bunch and insert up all of a bunch. There's going to need to be a lot of education ahead of time, but we'll decide how we're going to present that later. But I just, in case anyone was concerned, Mr. Roulette.
Hi, sorry, I just missed a huge amount of what happened, and I did have one concern about this. I don't know if you've covered it already, and if so, I apologize. And I'd like to shout out Taco Bell because they have Wi-Fi, which can be used in emergency. In your proposal, in a few different places, it says that the voting is closed when all state delegations have their votes in. In last convention and the one previous, we didn't get the votes in for a very long time. Like in 2020, it was like forever before Arkansas, like got around to telling us that they had left the building. If you remember that. Do we want to put that into the bylaws so that nothing can move forward if a single state decides to filibuster, more or less? And if we take this up now, is that far enough outside of what we're trying to do here that we should attempt to do it as its own separate thing instead of as one piece with all the rest of this. And again, I apologize for missing so much of what we just went over.
We did not discuss that. At any time, a delegate can move to close voting and stop a filibuster, which people were getting ready to do in 2022. And Ken warned them when he was chairing that he wasn't entertaining that motion at that time, but if Virginia kept it up, he was going to entertain that motion. So I don't think we need a rule for that. However, we can make a rule for that, but I do think that should be a separate proposal, that the idea here should be to change as little substance as possible and just make the rules conform to what we're actually doing right now and not change anything. Did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you.
Okay. So here is our combined Rule 3. I did rearrange things slightly to be in a more logical order, but we can move this around to our heart's content. What you know what I'm trying to say. I would suggest we ignore number 15 right here about the computer readable ballots, because we're going to be dealing with that when we deal with Mr. Latham's electronic voting procedure. So, this is everything without any weird language. So now I am going to go to Rule 3 here, in which I have struck through things and added things. We're going to go by these one by one, and I'll tell you if something that is struck has merely been moved or whether I got rid of it in its entirety. This will be fully open for amendment that I suggest we do. We can divide it, we could do it seriation, but let me first just describe the changes and then we'll decide how we want to handle. Mr. Bracco.
In the middle of Rule 2, a little past halfway down, you have in red bold, tellers approved by the secretary. Should that be struck out?
Yes.
Okay.
And I believe it was in my Word document. When you import Word documents into Google Docs, sometimes weird things happen. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of the changes, and then I'm going to suggest we probably handle it seriation, though someone can suggest a different method. So Rule 1. And I don't know why. 1 second here. Okay, so Rule 1, the state chair shall serve as chair of his or her delegation unless that delegation selects another of its members to serve as its chair and so notifies the secretary. There was a stray sentence that was 3.2 that said the convention seating will be by state delegation. I just moved that up here because it's talking, it's not really indicating that it's moved because I don't really know how to do that, but I'm going to highlight it to let you know that I did just, it was a stray sentence that I moved up here because it's talking about delegations. And I added, because I struck this out of a different place. This isn't a new sentence. This is just a moved sentence. There shall be the language is slightly changed because it talks about vote tellers approved by the secretary. So instead of, our rule kind of just assumed that already happened. So rather than just assuming that already happened, I changed the wording slightly to say there shall be a team of vote tellers approved by the secretary to make it a positive obligation that this is something to be done. The next paragraph, I struck out for each vote in which subtotals are submitted by delegation, and instead, you guys can see on the screen what's stricken out and written in, but each delegation shall conduct its vote by written ballot. It already says that. And then I added, delivered to the delegation chair, who shall tabulate the votes on a delegation tally sheet provided for this purpose. This is how we actually do things. The vote tellers or the secretary distributes out delegation tally sheets for each of the states. And then I struck out, each delegation shall tabulate its total vote, and the delegation chair shall deliver a written total to the secretary. The tabulation of the vote is dealt with in the language I just read that was added. And I separated out. Again, this reflects actual practice. The delegation chair then submits their tally sheet with a sealed envelope containing each of the delegate ballot votes to the vote tellers. Those sealed envelopes is what we use if there's a challenge. They're not signed.
3, 1, and 2.
And that's what the secretary uses to do an after convention audit. After convention audits don't change any results, but they often reveal issues that we can fix in the future. For instance, in 2018, there were some confusing votes because there were 3 Joe B's running for something. You had Joe Bishop Henchman, you had Joe Bookman, and there was another Joe B. And some people just wrote Joe B on their ballot. So that, you know, showed that that can happen. That's an issue. When all delegations have submitted their votes, the convention chair, not the secretary, shall declare the voting closed. Secretaries can't declare anything. Only chairs can do that. Here's where it says tellers approved by the secretary. That's what got struck and why I added that sentence to Rule 1. There shall be a team of vote tellers approved by the secretary. Because this sentence here just kind of assumed that has already happened. So after each delegation has tabulated its own vote totals, before submitting the totals to the secretary, the vote tellers shall review the ballot tabulation for accuracy and co-sign the delegation totals. And then after the secretary, and then it says, or the vote tellers have recorded all delegate submissions, the state by state delegation total for each candidate or choice shall be displayed on a projection screen for each delegation to review for accuracy. That's the exact same language that used to be rule number 10 all by its lonesome. And also repeated several times during our stricken language, during the period of time allotted for such votes, the business of the convention shall continue without interruption. So that way we're just saying it once. And number 4, so that we don't say over and over that a majority vote is required, we just say it once. For each election for office or nomination, we might want to reword nomination there. I can tell you what I meant by that is I'm talking about the nomination for president and vice president, because it's not really an election. We don't elect them. We're nominating them. A majority vote shall be required. Then, for new rule number 5, in single winner races, so that would be your president, your vice president, and your party officers, each delegate may cast a ballot with 1 vote for a candidate or for none of the above. And then the rest of the language did not change. So for every single winner race, if no candidate has attained a majority, the candidate with the fewest votes and any candidates polling less than 5% shall be struck from subsequent ballots. This procedure shall be repeated after every ballot in which no candidate has received a majority vote until one candidate attains a majority. I struck out that whole part about each delegation tabulating its vote because it's repeated multiple times, and that's stuck up in rule number 2. Same thing with displaying the results. Then we go to multi-winner races. And I just completely rewrote this so that all of the multi-winner races will fall under one rule. In multi-winner races, each delegate may cast a vote with a second, that should not be capitalized, with a vote for either none of the above or one vote per candidate for any number of candidates. Every ballot with a vote cast for none of the above or one of the candidates or one or more candidates is counted as one ballot cast. A vote for none of the above shall be ignored if the ballot also includes a vote for any other candidates. Tie votes affecting the outcome shall be decided by lot if the total number of candidates to fill the open seats. Now, before we got to the sentence, no language has been changed. It's just been consolidated into one rule. Here is a change because it used to say 5 seats. Well, that's assuming that our bylaws always say that the judicial committee shall be X number of seats, or that at large is going to be X number of seats. We don't need to say that in our rules. It should just say open seats so that we don't have to worry about changing the rules if we change our bylaws to have different number of seats. So that is one substantive change here. If the total number of candidates to fill the open seats have not attained a majority, any candidates who have attained a majority shall be elected, and the candidate with the fewest votes and any candidates polling less than 5% shall be struck from subsequent ballots. This procedure shall be repeated, and I had that, left that there by accident, until the total number of candidates to fill the open seats have received a majority vote or been elected in previous rounds. So this would cover your at-large, and this would cover your judicial committee. That makes the rest of this redundant because it's all been covered in these various paragraphs. I left alone the paragraph about regions, just moved that up to rule 2, and I left alone, except for the last sentence, the computer readable ballots, since we'll be dealing with that with Mr. Latham's proposal, because I moved this sentence about how the business of the convention can continue without interruption. I moved that up. So we're going to, unless somebody has another suggestion, deal with this seriation, but I want to hear from everyone first because somebody might have a different suggestion. Mr. Bracco.
So I just want to speak in favor of the language change in rule number 7. You had mentioned that we could need this in the future if there were a change to the number of seats. We actually need it now because we can't say either 5 or 7 because we
Right.
have 2 multi-winner elections and they're different numbers.
Right.
So this is not just for the future, it's for now.
You are correct. Since we're consolidating, one rule for both at-large and judicial committee, which has different number of people on the subsequent bodies. Mr. Roulette.
All right, I have 2 separate things. I suppose I'll start with number 7. For the last sentence, sorry, he just scrolled away from it.
7 is right here.
Yes. This procedure shall be repeated until the total number of candidates to fill the open seats have received a majority vote or been elected in previous rounds. What happens, let's say that the LNC, the at-larges are 5 people. 3 people are elected by majority vote, and then there's a majority for none of the above at spot number 4. So in that case, you would think that the delegates had indicated that they wanted to have only 3 at-larges, but it seems like this last sentence here would not allow that. Would not allow none of the above to function that way.
Our bylaws say if none of the above, and it might just be for president. 1 second, let's look. That's president and vice president. Should none of the above be selected for any party office, so that would mean the remaining however at-large seats, that position shall be declared vacant and none of the losing candidates for that position may be selected to fill the vacancy for that term of office. Elsewhere in the bylaws, it says vacancies are filled by the LNC. So what would happen is at convention, only 3 at-larges would be elected and the remaining 2 would be selected by the LNC, with any candidates who lost to none of the above being ineligible.
Okay. My other thing was to solve the problem with 3-5.
Up, you mean?
If we can
Move up?
scroll.
Okay.
Yes, please. Or 3-4, I'm sorry.
Okay.
There was you said for each election for office or nomination, how that could be like sort of confusing. What you meant is nomination for president and vice president inclusion. You could simply strike for each election and then strike for office or nomination in the comma. It would just read, for each election a majority vote shall be required. I don't think that you've lost any significant information there if you do that.
My question to you, though, is, because the word nomination is so equivocal. We had Mike Seebeck's probably reliving nightmares of Colorado discussions past. Is a nomination an election? Is selecting our top ticket, is that an election?
It's a C-election, not an election.
Okay, if it causes problems, don't worry about it.
But I think that this wording here is weird too. So yeah, I think this whole sentence is kind of weird and I'm not sure how to word it better.
Well, I'll leave that up to everybody else.
Okay, I had Mr. Latham.
All right. And maybe just taking that last one first, maybe add just before nomination language consistent with existing bylaws, just like presidential and vice presidential. I'll just throw that out. So, Madam Chair, and I had emailed you just thoughts because we're now starting to deal with new language in this proposal. So, and I was wondering, I want to drop it into the chat so people can see what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But let's go up to just the very top of the proposal. So I think 3.1. And so there shall be a team of vote tellers approved by the secretary. We do have that language approved by the secretary in the existing rules. I think it's the very last one, like Rule 10. And I'm wondering
and
if—
it's yeah, it did appear elsewhere. Yes.
Well, in this context, I think approve is the only. And so this is kind of my question, maybe to you and others who want, is appoint a better term of art there? Does the secretary appoint tellers is one? And then, so that's one issue. Then the other is, I think tellers contemplates you're counting votes. And so I think vote tellers is more than we need. I looked in Roberts 11. I don't have a searchable version of Roberts 12, but they use tellers throughout, and there was only one occurrence of the term election tellers. I think tellers just assumes that. So that's kind of my question. I don't know that we need to say vote tellers repeatedly through this. So that's just one suggestion. And I'm seeing a comment from Richard Brown saying tellers would be okay.
Yeah,
So
and I agree. I just didn't want to make another version till we discussed. Are you?
Should I make a global motion now just to make it all where it says vote tellers?
I think that would start to clean things up. So it would appear here. It would appear where I'm highlighting my teller. I mean my cursor right there. It would appear right here. It would appear right here. It would appear right here. And I don't know if it appears anywhere else. No,
Looking at 7, it's pretty
and 7, it's
involved.
in there too.
Well, I don't know, but that's a
I
pretty
don't think it
involved one.
is.
No, okay.
So you are moving to strike the word vote before the word tellers, each place it appears and what's on the screen in 1 and 2.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm going to ask, is there any, say so verbally, because I don't want people to lose their place in line. Verbally, is there any objection to that change? I don't object as the maker. Okay, I'm going to strike that, and I'm treating your one thing about approved versus appointed as somewhat of a point of information and kind of like a question to the current secretary, because I would like to address that, and then you can decide if you'd like to make a motion. I think I got them all. Okay, the reason I believe this goes beyond my time, but here's the reason why I think it says approved. The convention has the right to appoint tellers. This doesn't take away appointment rights from anyone else. It just says that the secretary has to approve them. This appears in bylaws oftentimes, and it might even in your own state, where it will say the state chair can appoint the chairs of each committee with the approval of the board. So like the state chair makes the decision, but the board has to give their approval. That's how I view this. I think if there was a secretary, or there were even bigger factional battles than there are in the party right now, I think the convention wants to retain the power to appoint tellers. And this then says they have to be approved by the secretary. So it's kind of a balancing of powers. I personally don't have a problem with it saying appointed. I think it would simplify things, because if there's challenges to votes, the convention delegates do have recourse to challenge votes. But I'm just telling you why I think the language is the way it is. But as the maker of the motion, I have no problem with it saying appointed. But I just wanted to give you some historical and just general parliamentary background as to why I think it's worded that way. So it's up to you if you want to make that motion, Mr. Latham.
Thank you. No, that's helpful historical background. I don't know where I sit on that, and what I'm hearing, and maybe there's another question, is that this is kind of including existing language. So this is kind of the status quo language. And I just don't want to complicate this already complicated proposal by, open up a hornet's nest by,
Mr. Brown corrected me, by the way, in chat and said it's the chair that appoints tellers. I haven't looked this up in a while. I know it's not the secretary who generally appoints, who not per Roberts appoints them, but that is how we've done it. Is the secretary just does it.
Yeah, so I think I don't want to address that point in this current rewrite, but I think it's something this committee ought to think about going forward. I do have two more items. So on, what is it now? It's kind of on the 5. Scroll down.
Yes.
So in single winner races, we don't have that word single winner or races in the existing bylaws or rules. And just as a matter of tone, it seems unnecessary, races and contests and winners and losers. So my suggestion was replacing that with for single office or nominee elections, comma, each, blah, blah, blah. And then.
Okay. That's getting if you don't mind, Mr. Latham, can I come back to you? Because my intention was to do this seriation, which means we go through one at a time. You had some really simple changes with the vote teller things, but I will put you first in line for when we come to number 5. Is that okay with you?
Nope, totally sounds fair. Yeah, let's take them in order so we don't get too
Okay.
spread apart. I have one more similar thing for the multi-winner part.
Okay,
Kinda
so,
same
I'll
concept.
put you first in line for both of those. Mr. Seebeck.
Yeah, I got a question. I think I might have missed something here. With this proposed rearrangement, down on the parts regarding NOTA, if I heard this correctly, okay, what's affecting outcome? Okay, if we wind up with a case of on the judicial committee where we don't get a full JudCom elected because NOTA happened to win,
Right,
that creates vacancies for the JudCom.
correct.
Who fills those vacancies under this
The judicial committee does.
Okay, it's not the LNC. That was what I was
No,
worried.
the question before had to do with at-large or national committee vacancies.
Okay,
So
okay.
vacancies would be filled as the bylaws says.
Okay, I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Bracco.
Put me in line for number 7, please.
Okay, let me put you, Mr. Latham's also there as well. So I have you, Ms. Arrowood.
At Reno, I was asked by Alex Flores to be a teller. And he told me that I had to report to the secretary, which was the John from Texas.
Okay. It's not the job of the Convention Oversight Committee in any possible world to get vote tellers. I'm not going to speak ill of the past Secretary Pro Tem and how that was handled. It was confusing, but that's never how things are handled.
Okay.
Okay, so what we're going to do, unless you had something general, Mr. Latham, I was gonna do the seriation procedure.
It's to Miss Arrowwood's point, and that kind of, so recall our earlier discussion when we wanted to clarify party secretary as opposed to convention secretary. Would
Yes.
this be an instance where we want to clarify which secretary we're talking about in Rule 3.1?
Well, we're on one, so we're doing seriation. It could be, because what if it's not? Okay, here's where it gets problematic, though. That whole thing gets really problematic. What if the secretary is removed in the midst of convention and a new convention secretary is appointed? Do all the tellers get thrown out? Or does there need to be a new approval? I think keeping it here, just the secretary, keeps things simple. I understand that whole thing that happened before. That might be something we need to look at in greater detail. I don't really care one way or another. I'm just throwing that out. I don't know if any other convention, more historical people here have been to past conventions, can let me know if there's ever been motions to replace the convention secretary or the convention chair, both of which happened in Reno. I then moved to have John remain the convention secretary. And it would have turned out not to be an issue in Reno because they were all my tellers to begin with. However, I can see this being an issue, and I don't know if these types of motions have ever happened before at a convention. It's happened to me. Actually, it happened in 2020. There was a motion to remove me as convention secretary in 2020 because I had indicated, because of the bylaws, irregularities, we will call them kindly, that I had indicated that I didn't know if I could legally sign the nomination certificate. So there was a motion to remove me as convention secretary during that convention. So it's happened twice in 2020 and it failed. It happened in 2020 and then it kind of sort of happened in 2022, but I don't know if it's ever happened before. Mr. Roulette, you've been around a while.
Yeah, other than these last couple of times, and except for the 2 conventions on which I have absolutely or close to absolutely nothing, it's never happened as far as I know. Having said that, I would like to say I would prefer it to say either party secretary or convention secretary, and I would lean toward convention. But, you know, clarity over brevity most of the time.
And I would say probably the convention secretary, if they got named on the spot, that they're probably just going to approve the ones that are already trained. Otherwise, they're fucked. I mean, just to be practical. Mr. Molman, I think you might have been offering some historical information.
Yeah, and as far as I'm aware, it has not happened in my time in the party other than the times you have mentioned. And then also, along with that, I know the bylaws specify that the LNC chair shall preside at all conventions.
That is, that's, we dealt with, I don't know if you were here last time. That is a bylaw in the nature of a rule of order that's very typically in the bylaws.
Okay. Okay.
Same thing where it says that the secretary will take minutes of all meetings, like when Alicia Matson couldn't make it to New Orleans because he suffered a 1/4 inch of snow and shut down all the airports in the country. I was secretary for that meeting, even though I was Region 1, because that's also, you can appoint a pro tem for various reasons. So, I see both Mr. Brown and Mr. Jacobs had their hands raised to offer some parliamentary information without objection. Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Madam Chair. JJ and I both said the same thing in the chat, that if you, let me rephrase that, if the convention secretary is removed and a new one is appointed or elected, selected, that you would not need to reappoint the tellers. However, the new secretary could remove the tellers if it's the secretary who appoints them. That's because of the rule in Roberts that whoever, what person or whatever body has the power to appoint has the power to remove.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Jacobs?
Madam Chair, thank you for permitting me to speak. I believe that there would be a distinction between a new secretary and a secretary pro tem.
Yeah.
I do not believe that the power to appoint would extend to the secretary pro tem, much like it would not necessarily apply to a chair pro tem making appointments to certain committees or something like that. So I don't believe that it would actually be an issue. Whoever is initially appointed would remain appointed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jacobs. And the more I'm thinking about it, I think we're overthinking this and complicating something when we have a much larger problem of a mess in our rules, and that we probably should just leave that sentence alone. My opinion, motions can be made otherwise. Okay, I see Mr. Latham agrees. We're going seriation, which means nothing's really getting approved. We're amending each paragraph separately. Are there any further amendments to paragraph number 1? And we can always go back to it, but just for now. Okay, hearing none, we're going to go on to number 2. So if there are any amendments to be had to number 2, speak now. Okay, now we're on to, it says 4 on the screen, but it is actually 3 with the wonky language. Does anyone have any suggestions for cleaning up that language where it says for office or nomination, with the idea that nomination means nomination for presidential or vice presidential?
Madam Secretary, is it possible to enlarge the text on the screen?
Let me see.
Of
View.
course, that's something I have to do. I don't know how to, except on my cell phone.
I just did a little bit.
Yeah, that helps.
I'm gonna see. There we go. That's bigger. Mr. Latham.
Yeah, sorry, I was just typing it up, but basically to import language I've suggested for that single winner. So just for each election for office or nomination for president and vice president, comma, a majority vote.
So you would add or nomination for president and, or it would be an or? And
Well,
vice president?
I used and.
I think that makes, because otherwise there's a lot of ors in there.
Yeah.
And
Point of order,
I'm sorry?
point of order, are we still nominating them separately or together?
Right now, we nominate them separately. That is in our bylaws.
Then it would be an or. Because they're not joined together. They're
Okay,
separate.
Well, I think and contemplates that they're still going to be separate
yeah.
elections. We could maybe fix that by saying nominations for president and vice president.
I think that's better.
That would work.
Okay, no, that actually doesn't, because it does that word, it's not the S. This is still vague. Do you mean nominations as in nominations for the nomination? Do you understand what I'm saying? The word
No, it's still a problem.
Yes, it's still a problem.
It's
How about for all ballots? Because this is dealing with balloting. A majority vote shall be required, and that deals with everything.
well. Sorry if you want me to.
No, I want to hear what you have to say.
What about our multi-member bodies?
It's a ballot. A majority vote is required.
Well, and so but if we may move to single transferable vote proportional representation, then they
Okay.
necessarily would not have a majority. So I want to keep majority for, single winner races, even though I don't like that term.
But that right now is already an issue here. And we can make an exception to this rule in a rule, saying in the event that X is used,
yeah, we could clean it up later. Let's see, I see Mr. Bracco has a
okay, I don't know who was first. Was Dr. Moulton first or Mr. Bracco first? Can I
Dr.
take
Moulton.
that? Can I
I have-
take that out, what you said, though, Mr. Latham, since we agreed it didn't really fix the issue?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Moulton.
Can you circle back to me, because I have a question about paragraph 2. So once we're done with 4, can we go back to 2?
We can, Mr. Bracco.
So I had put something in the chat and I'd like to get everybody to look at it. I'll read it out. For each election for party office or selection of candidates for federal office, a majority vote shall be required. Gets rid of the nomination word too.
It does, but why would you say federal office rather than president or vice president, since that's the only one we do? We don't do senators and.
I mean, I guess we can put that instead. I just
Oh,
like
I don't
we
want that.
like it's shorter, and we already have in other areas like we don't not like the national committee or national convention doesn't select senator candidates.
But
But-
would that bind the state parties?
Yeah, you
You
don't
do
want
select that?
people arguing that the national rules say we have, even though it doesn't bind them. I don't want to be causing fights at state conventions because we worded
Okay.
things badly. Or
That's-
how, so for, or
President
selection,
or vice president, that's fine. It like
Or-
I was trying to be brief, but okay.
can someone tell me if we hyphenate elsewhere for vice president?
It's supposed to be.
Is it though elsewhere?
Well, actually, I'm not sure about that. So
It depends on your style guide. Vice chair and
Yeah.
vice president, it's, let me see.
Right in the index
It
at
appears
the
to be
top.
hyphenated throughout.
Yeah,
Okay,
Article
then we're gonna
4
hyphenate it.
It's even in the title of Article 14.
Okay,
Uh,
all right. So for election for party office or selection of candidates for president and vice president, a majority vote shall be required. I'm good with that. Mr. Roulette.
okay, I have a nutcase take on this one. If we just said for election for party office, a majority shall be required. If number 4 here was silent on the office of president and vice president, people might say, "Oh no, what do we need a majority?" And then they would read down to what is currently 5, and then they would read in single winner races, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If no candidate has attained a majority, the candidate with the fewest votes. In that case,
Are you?
if 4 was silent, would not 5 tell you how president is done?
Yeah. So are you suggesting just getting rid of 4 entirely?
You could get rid of 4 entirely, or you could just say for each election for party office, and a majority shall be required. That's a single, short, simple sentence. And unless maybe you don't even need that, but I don't think you need to even talk about president and vice president in section 4 here.
I just think you made a great argument for getting rid of 4 entirely, though, because we say it for single winner races and we say it for multi-winner races.
So moved.
So
Could
Dr.
you
Moulton,
repeat the point? But we've already got it covered elsewhere. Was that the point?
yes, it
Yeah.
already says that in the next paragraph for single winner races and the following paragraph for multi-winner races.
And if in the future we do some crazy not majority thing, then you don't have to change 4 because it doesn't exist. You just change the multi-winner rule
Yeah.
because that's what you're
Right.
changing. So it makes that easier too in the future.
Yes.
If you wanted to do that.
Okay, so let's just go back to what I originally had. And Dr. Moulton moved to strike this. And I actually think that's probably the best solution, but I just want to stick this on the screen. Is there any? We're not adopting anything yet. This is because we're doing it seriation, but is there any objection to this so far? It's not final yet. Okay, hearing none. Now we're going to Mr. Latham. Number 5. I'm sorry, Dr.
Excuse me,
Moulton.
Madam Chair, could we go back to paragraph 2? or
Oh,
do you
yeah,
wanna
that's
do
right.
that
I'm so
at the end?
sorry. No. Let's do it right now. So while we're thinking about it.
Yeah, I just had a brief question. Where we say state by state delegation totals for each candidate, or choice shall be displayed on the on a projection screen for each delegation to review for accuracy. I know that's been our custom, and I guess it's in the current rules, but my concern is we are tying ourselves to a particular technology, and technology has progressed. Why does it have to be a projection screen? It seems to me nowadays it would be fairly trivial for the secretary to post it on a Google Doc or something else that delegation chairs could review. So do we really want to tie ourselves to the technology of a projection screen?
I'm going to treat that somewhat as like a point of information. Obviously you can make any amendment that you'd like. The goal of the of myself in this is to change as little as possible. Even if the secretary did it on a Google Doc, it doesn't play to cameras. So I believe you've brought up before too, like if CNN is filming, having things up on the screen is exciting.
I think that's definitely true for the presidential race, but I don't think, I think maybe a waste of time for party offices and other things that CNN doesn't care about would be my argument.
But what waste is it? Because you're already going to have it anyway. If you're putting it on a Google Doc, displaying it.
Mr. Latham suggests that maybe that should be a separate proposal, which certainly we could draw up later. But
Yeah,
I'll
that's
just
what
keep
I
that in
would
mind for the future.
suggest if you want to
Okay.
change that.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Latham, number 5. Well, it's not really, but you know what, single winner races paragraph.
Right. So, yeah, my motion would be to replace, because we don't have that single winner language already or races, we just replace that with for single office or nominee elections, comma, each delegate may cast.
Can I just tell you, you just re-added in the nominee problem?
I know, and I hate myself for doing that, but so we still need to come up with what did we didn't do anything, or did we do something
No,
there?
we deleted that paragraph. I have a question for you. What is the problem with saying single winner races? That is not.
The word winner.
It is
Because
though.
because you know, I want some people to feel like we're all winners. You're a winner for running, and I know that's sappy, but
I mean, let me just, if you permit me, and I'm sure you know this, but maybe it's not your experience. And my experience in dealing with like RCV Colorado, or just dealing with town council laws in Colorado having to do with races, the term single winner race is almost a term of art.
and I completely agree, and I use it myself. I'm trying to improve of what we've got there since we're doing a bylaw. So and there's the lock-in concern I have, where we kind of, why we deleted that for what if we do get to a proportional situation, and maybe that solves it. But again, I wanted to get away from the winner word and the races word.
A proportional doesn't come into play with single winner.
Okay, but what about, okay, so maybe let's set single winner. What about the word races? Should we elections, single winner elections?
So is that your motion?
That'll be my motion.
So you would like to strike races. So format, text, strike through. Since that word was never there to begin with, I don't really want to make it red, but I'll fix this. I understand it's still striking through when it shouldn't be. So you'd like to strike races and make it for in single winner elections.
Yes.
Okay, would you like to speak to that any further?
I was just gonna say I'm scrolling through Roberts really quick, and I'm not. Yeah, the word race doesn't even show up in at least the 11th edition. So yeah, it's just, again, the whole, I want us to get away. I think words do matter sometimes in terms of setting tone, and races suggest, horse race and that kind of stuff. And it's just a competition and it's an election. So that's it.
Okay, Mr. Seebeck and Mr. Bracco, are you in line for this amendment?
I actually had a point of order.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Seebeck.
Single winner should be hyphenated.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay, did you have anything further? Okay, Mr. Bracco.
I think this was brought up when we were discussing what was previously number 4, but is president and vice president an election? And if we're now saying election, can somebody then argue, oh, this doesn't apply to president and vice president?
Good point. Mr. Seebeck?
Is it in order to move to amend the amendment?
It
Is
is.
too deep? It is in order.
Mhm.
Okay. Move to change the word elections to, is the right answer here, contests or balloting.
Okay, which one? Do you want
Let's
balloting or
float
contest?
Let's float balloting out there first.
Okay.
And also related to that, change the, also, would it be in order to also move to change the word in there to 4 at the beginning of the sentence?
Can we deal
Or is
with that
a separate?
separately?
Okay, it was a
'Cause,
stylistic question.
It might turn out to be totally non-controversial, but it could turn out to be the most controversial thing we do tonight. So I'd like to deal with
That's
it
fine.
separately.
That's fine.
Would you like to speak to that?
Sure. We're talking about casting ballots. So to me, casting a ballot means you're balloting. That's pretty straightforward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I was next. Kind of when you're speaking to an amendment to the amendment, it kind of gets into both a little bit. I like the amendment to the amendment better than I like balloting better than elections. However, I think races, I personally don't know why we're stressing over this. What is the question asked all year long? Are you running again for secretary? Who's running for chair? We have races. We can call it a peanut butter sandwich, but it's a race. And I don't know why in the Libertarian Party, where we're a meritocracy, we are freaking out over the word race. These are single winner races. This is almost a term of art in in election science, if that's even such a word. I think this is much ado about nothing. I will be voting for the amendment to the amendment over elections, but I will ultimately be voting, if my vote counts, my practice, to just go back to what was there to begin with. I don't know who was in line next, so I'm going on the honor system here. Was it Mr. Molman, I believe? Mr. Molman.
Yeah, I was just going to state, I mean, it is an election, right? You're electing someone to be the nominee. Balloting is fine. All of it's fine. I don't want to, we've got 10 minutes left in this meeting. It would be good to get through this if we can. So that's all I've got.
Thank you. I'm only gonna, Dr. Moulton hasn't spoken on this, so I'm gonna go to Dr. Moulton, then Mr. Latham. Dr. Moulton.
I'll try to be brief. The Brevity Caucus was gonna mutiny for his first idea, but I like elections. I like elections better than races. I like balloting worst of all. Thank you.
Did you say worst of all or first of all?
Worst of all.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Moulton. Mr. Latham.
So I'm confused by what is Chuck saying? He disfavors balloting the most, or?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And yeah, that's my point too. Balloting, I'm looking through the 11th edition. Balloting, as I'm reading the context, it seems like the process, and the election is the result, the outcome. So to me, balloting just comes up short as a term of art. I do see Richard Brown in there commenting that he favors elections. So I think elections is just the preferred standardized term that we ought to go with. You know, the political correctness of races or not races aside, I think elections just makes it more standardized.
Okay, thank you. And there was something like I was gonna say, and it like completely went out of my mind. Oh, I'm buying you a 12th edition because if I hear you mention the 11th one more time, I'm flying to Utah. And like
I have a 12th edition. I just don't have it.
You know, it's on
text
Kindle.
searchable.
It's on Kindle.
Yeah, but I'd have to buy it, so I'm cheap.
Oh my God, we're probably just gonna chip in here so we don't have to hear you say
Well, why don't you
11.
just-
Go fund me
digital
for Rob's
version?
Kindle 12th
Why don't you
edition.
say
All
the
right.
digital-
The CD version works great.
Okay,
What was the flash stick PDF one?
Mr. Roulette. He appears to have entered the waiting room. I don't know if that's Mr. Roulette. I'm gonna give you a minute because there's two Tom Roulette. Will it like the real Slim Shady? Will the real Tom Roulette stand up? And if you have something to
Hi.
say, hello.
The bad thing about Taco Bell internet is that it kicks you out every 20 minutes and you've got to reconnect every 20 minutes.
Ah,
I had something to say, but then my question was answered. So thank you.
okay, thank you. Okay, is there any further debate on the amendment to the amendment? Okay, I know there are objections. So, Madam Secretary, if you would take a roll call vote, what we are voting on is striking the word elections, which is already striking the word races if we got back to the main level, and replacing it with balloting so that the introductory phrase would read in single winner balloting. A yes vote would adopt balloting, then we'd be choosing between balloting and races. A no vote would kill balloting, and then we'd be choosing between elections and races. So if you would take a roll call, Madam Secretary. You are muted, Madam Secretary.
Oh, okay, Arrowwood, I'm going to say no. Bracco,
Point of information, yes would be balloting, no would be elections, correct?
Okay, I'm gonna have to ask in the future before we start roll calling, these points need to be made. So we're not interrupting voting, but I'm gonna answer it this time. Balloting would then get rid of elections so that the next vote would be between balloting and races. So a yes vote would do that. A no vote would make our next vote between elections and races.
Thank you. Yes.
yes, for Bracco. Sazelski,
No.
Latham,
No.
Martin,
No.
Dr. Chuck Moulton,
No.
all right. Tom Rowlett,
Nope.
okay. Rufo,
No.
Mike Seebeck,
Got persuaded, no.
all right, Madam Chair, we have eight, no, I mean, we have 1 yes and 8 no's.
I will not be voting. So
Okay.
now we get rid of balloting. And I'm going to assume, unless somebody raises their little yellow hand, that there's no further debate between elections and races. So we are going to move to a roll call vote. A yes vote would strike races and put in elections. A no vote would get rid of elections and keep the original wording of races. Okay, Madam Secretary.
I like elections.
Are you wanting still to debate?
No,
Okay,
I guess I'm voting yes. I like elections.
okay.
Bracco,
No.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
He said no.
Okay. Sizelski,
Yes.
Latham,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Chuck Moulton, Dr. Chuck Moulton,
Yes.
Tom Rowlett,
Yes.
Mike Ruffo,
No.
okay, Mike Seebeck,
No,
Madam Chair, we have 6 yeses and 3 noes. Do you care to vote?
Nope, I do not. So
No.
it is now elections. And let me take that highlight off there. Are there further, Mr. Bracco?
Motion to extend time 10 minutes.
Okay, is there any objection to extending time for 10 minutes? Mr. Seebeck?
I'm objecting, just get in the queue.
Okay,
Do we have to vote?
nope, there's no objections. Mr. Seebeck, go ahead. We're extended for 10 minutes. We started at 47 after, so we're right now going to 57 again after. So we actually have 13 more minutes. Mr. Seebeck.
To amend in to 4, FOR that is.
Okay, so here you'd like to strike in and make it 4 single winner elections.
Yes,
And would you like to speak to that?
I think it's better wording. I believe because because we're talking about a balloting casting that applies to that type of election, so it would be for that type of election. I think similar would be done in multi, but we're not there yet.
Yep. I have a feeling that whatever changes get made here in that little introductory phrase thing will be made in multi as well. Is there any further debate on this, on striking in and making it 4? So it'd be 4 single winner elections instead of in single winner elections. Is there any objection to that change? Okay, seeing none, that passes. Are there any further amendments to the single winner elections paragraph? Okay, we're moving to the multi-winner one. I am going to make a suggestion and see if there is any objection. Before we amend further, I would suggest that this introductory phrase in multi-winner races get changed to 4 multi-winner elections to make it consistent with the changes we just passed. Is there any objections to that?
I guess I have a point of clarification.
Yes.
Because my suggestion is for at-large member and judicial committee elections, would there be other multi-winner elections
No,
that I'm leaving out?
not at this time.
Okay, well, so I don't know. I guess I'd want to hear what the committee, that's my proposal is to replace that language. Because
I'm
just
sorry.
change, yeah, to substitute for at-large member and judicial committee elections for in multi-winner races, just to be more specific.
Okay, but can I suggest that we first make the language conforming so that if you're, because there was already a motion on the floor, which I'll get to you next. But the motion on the floor already was to change just for conformity, which you can strike. But this way, if your strike doesn't pass, we have conforming a language that instead of in multi-winner races, it says for multi-winner elections.
Okay, no objection to that.
Okay, now from there, you wanted to change that to, what was the language?
Do you want to just do the procedural without objection for that?
Yeah, there
change?
was no objection to that
Okay.
as far as I knew. So you're up for amendment.
Okay, so my motion is to replace multi-winner with at-large member and judicial committee.
For at large member.
And JC.
It would be at large national committee member. Is that?
I tried to draft it based on what's in the bylaws already. I
Hold
know
on
that.
one.
And I know it's kind of inconsistent all over, but
It is.
if we want to do a preferred term that we think we're going to adopt globally later, I'm fine with that.
No, it was rule 7 before, I think, wasn't it? Yeah. No, rule 8.
I see it
And
in Article
National
10 set.
Committee. It says
Yeah.
at-large members of the National Committee is what
Right.
Rule 8 presently says.
Right.
You could say what you'd like, but
Yeah, so just because I see it as kind of the common term of art, that's why I'm going with at-large member.
okay, so for at-large member
And
and
judicial committee.
committee. And I don't think at-large is capitalized.
No,
Large member and judicial committee.
So you're wanting to strike multi-winner
yes.
and we're keeping elections because we changed that, and this highlighted language is your amendment. Would you like to speak to that, Mr. Latham?
Yeah, just to recap, since multi-winner is only speaking to those two specific elections, I would just rather be more specific since we're only talking about those two and not leave it open to people wondering what multi-winner elections are we talking about? Because it's just those two.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if the hands that are raised for this amendment. Is yours, Dr. Moulton?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
The Brevity Caucus has met and we passed a resolution strongly condemning this proposal. It adds a bunch of words. Not only that, but in addition to adding words, it also makes it more obfuscated and more complicated to deal with later amendments. So for example, Mr. Molman had proposed that in the future, he would like to see the Bylaws Committee and the Platform Committee selected by the convention body rather than the LNC. And if we adopted something like that in the future, this is another place that we need to be changed. If we started adding specific names of things that qualify for this. I think multi-winner election, this broadly encompasses everything and is future-proof. So I would urge you to vote against Mr. Latham's amendment. Thank you.
I have a point of information for Dr. Moulton. Who else are members of the Brevity Caucus? You need to make an LPD article.
We use
It's
the
a short
secret
list.
ballot, so
It's a short list. It's just you.
very short list.
It's a very brief list. Mr. Bracco.
So Dr. Moulton beat me to it on, especially on the future proofing. I know that Mr. Molman has those two committees, and like you never know what's going to happen. This is going to cover the existing language. Multi-winner is going to cover if we make this committee or the platform or create an entirely new committee that is elected at the convention or whatever would happen, it would cover all of those. So I too would urge you to vote against this.
Okay.
Can I withdraw my, because I'm persuaded, and I love to support that we might expand multi-winner elections. I had no idea. So I don't want to preclude that.
Well, let me ask, is there any objection to Mr. Latham withdrawing his amendment? Is your hand raised? No, I don't think Dr. Moulton, I think you mean to briefly lower your hand. Yes. Okay. And just so you know, Mr. Molman has declared he is also a member. You'll need to briefly vote on that. Okay, text. Okay, all right.
I better be a member of that. I mean,
I think you're a heretic.
I don't know who
in the
decides.
brevity.
I don't know who decides.
I can tell you, I'm not so sure you're a member of the Brevity Caucus, Mr. Latham.
Who votes on this? I wanna recount.
Okay, are there any further amendments to this paragraph on multi-winner elections?
Talking about just that one.
We are, and we're going to go back to the whole thing. We're going paragraph by paragraph.
So I wanted to go in on this one as well.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Just not on that section.
So
the
it's whole paragraph. Yes, go ahead.
Actually, at the very end.
Okay.
So in the middle, there's a section that says any candidates who have attained a majority shall be elected. And then the last sentence, this procedure shall be repeated until the total number of candidates to fill the open seats have received a majority vote or been elected in previous rounds.
Yes.
Given that last sentence says fill the open seats, and that in the previous rounds, if some candidates, but not all, had received a majority vote, then those seats are not open. Do you need the or been elected in previous rounds? Or could we just...
Is that Ken Molman or Bracco speaking?
It's Mr. Bracco.
Okay, thank you.
So I think I would like to move to strike or been elected in previous rounds from the end of that last sentence.
Okay. And do you wish to speak further to that?
Maybe a little bit. So in that sentence, it already says open seats. If seats had been filled in previous rounds, they are not open. So by saying open seats, you're already covering it. And I think that's just duplicative.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to this?
I'm thinking this through, because number one, it's existing language, and so are we getting substantive? And I'm just thinking of, again, if you start to use a ranked choice voting process, sometimes you say you stop counting the candidates that are either elected or defeated. And so I'm just wondering how that would, how this change would affect that. But I'm slow when it comes to this math election stuff. So that's my question on that. Would this upset that?
Remember, right now, you know, as time goes on, we can end up adopting proposals that render moot previously adopted proposals, and the later adopted proposals take precedence. Right now, we don't use RCV. So unless we are moving to amend to add a whole like RCV procedure at this time to this rewrite of existing language, adding in, you know, but what if we're going to read pig entrails? How would that factor in? Like, it's not relevant yet because that's not how we're doing things, and there's nothing in our bylaws yet to provide for it. I mean, that's really all I could say there. Also, remember, and I know I could see both Mr. Bracco and Mr. Latham have their hand raised. Remember, these are rules which can be suspended. But I'm going to allow Mr. Latham, since I brought up pig entrails, I think always that the person last speaking gets to respond to pig entrails. So Mr. Latham and then Mr. Bracco.
I wasn't personally invested in any of that at all. But, what was your point then, that this is kind of going out of the scope of the rewrite, and
Yes.
that, okay, yeah, because no, that's my an additional concern. So I may support this in theory, but I just, because it overcomplicates the rewrite, I don't know that I'm supportive right now.
Mr. Bracco.
Motion to extend time by 5 minutes.
Okay, is there an objection to extending time for an additional 5 minutes?
Objection. I gotta go to bed and go to work tomorrow.
Okay, there is an objection. Ms. Arrowood, if you would take a vote.
All right. I'm going to say yes. Bracco,
Yes.
Sizelski,
Abstain.
all right, sir. Latham,
I'm abstaining as well.
Martin,
Abstain.
okay, Chuck Moulton, Dr. Chuck Moulton,
I abstain.
Tom Rowlett,
Yes.
Mike Ruffo,
No.
all right, Mike Seebeck,
Oh,
okay. Madam Chair, we have 3 yes, 2 no, and 4 abstains.
I'm going to vote yes to make the 2/3 vote, and we're extended for 5 minutes. Is there any further debate on Mr. Bracco's amendment, which is to strike or been elected in previous rounds? Is there any objection to Mr. Bracco's amendment? Mr. Latham, I wasn't sure if you were objecting.
Yeah, I think I'm objecting just because of the point you made earlier. And
Okay.
I just think it goes outside the scope of the rewrite.
Ms. Arrowood, if you would do a roll call vote, we are voting on striking or been elected in previous rounds.
Okay. I'm going to say no. Bracco,
Yes.
Sizelski,
Yes.
Latham,
No.
Martin,
Yes.
Dr. Chuck Moulton,
Yes.
Tom Rowlett,
Yes.
Mike Ruffo,
No.
Mike Seebeck.
Abstain.
All right. 5 yes. 3 no. Madam Chair, we have 5 voting yes, 3 voting no, and 1 abstain.
Okay, so that is stricken. Okay, the last 2 items, and I do see Mr. Roulette's hand raised from, because I'm still asking about number 7. Mr. Roulette,
Move to adjourn.
well, we were extended for 2 more minutes. Would you mind just letting that time expire and then we adjourn automatically?
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Where we were at the end here is, it's not really 16 and 17, but it's these 2 paragraphs. I'm going to suggest that we leave the thing about the region alone. I think this goes way beyond our simplification, but I'm going to ask, is there any changes to that language that I left completely untouched about regions? Okay, right now, seeing none. We are on the last one, which the only thing that was struck was about the business of the convention continuing, because that was moved up. That language has been preserved. It's just been put in a different paragraph. And the intent of my proposal was not to touch anything about this computer readable ballots, because we're going to be dealing with this language in Mr. Latham's amendment. So I'm actually going to say this is like beyond the scope of my amendment, because we're going to be dealing with this later. I'm frozen. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we've been through the seriation. Are there any further changes that anyone wishes to make to this rewrite? If there aren't, we can go to a vote and then immediately start next meeting with Mr. Latham's proposal about electronic voting. If there are, we will start next meeting with further changes. Mr. Roulette.
I'd prefer to leave us where we are right now so that we may change this up at the beginning of the next meeting.
And in case things come up that you think about it.
Yes, please.
Okay, what I will do then is I'll give a clean copy of how this looks. And I'll post it on the list so that everyone can read it without all the distraction of this blue and red, to see if something jumps out at you. And that's how we will start next meeting. Without any further motions to extend time, we are adjourned at 11:05 Eastern, with our next meeting being June 15th.